now. All right, and I'm going to start. Are you guys seeing my my screen?
I see your screen with us on top of it.
Okay. And you're still seeing your screen with you on top of my screen with you on top of it?
Yeah, I am.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is David Robinson, the Director of Membership and Meetings for the Linguistic Society of America. We'll take just a few more minutes and wait for some more of our attendees to join us, and then I think we'll get started at about 5 minutes after. So sit tight for a couple of minutes and we'll get started.
Uh-oh.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Linguistic Society of America's webinar on navigating careers. I'm David Robinson, the LSA's Director of Membership and Meetings. Thank you for making time to join us this afternoon. The LSA is the largest scholarly society devoted to the scientific study of language. You'll see some more information on your screen right now about our most visible activities, our open access publishing program, our annual meetings, and our signature linguistic institutes, and also about the work that we do behind the scenes, more important now than ever, to ensure a proper understanding of the importance of linguistics research and to safeguard important funding sources for our field. Just a few sort of housekeeping notes before we begin. There will be a question and answer period at the end of the webinar, and your microphones are muted, but you'll be able to ask questions using the questions widget on your dashboard. You'll also see a handout from Anna Prester. It's in the handouts widget, and you can download that at any time during the webinar. And finally, there'll be a recording of this webinar on our website, and we'll let you know when it's available. And then last of all, to give our speakers a better idea of who their audience is, we'd like to ask you a couple of quick questions. These will be coming up on your screen shortly, and please just make your choice, and we'll share the answers when you've completed them. So let's see. Okay, here comes the first poll. So please go ahead and answer. Okay, looks like just about up. Okay, a few more people have voted. Okay, it looks looks like just about everyone has voted. I'm going to go ahead and close this, and then I will share the results with you. So there you should be able to see the results. Looks like about 62% of you are current students or recent graduates. 25% are in the early career, and 14% are later in the career than that. And then there's one more poll I would like to send out. And see, here we go. So take a moment if you would to answer this one. It's asking about your current job searching status. Great, it looks like just about everyone has voted. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results again with you. Okay, thank you very much for doing that. That will help our presenters know who their audience is. So without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to Dr. Anna Trester. She is one of the co-conveners of the LSA's Linguistics Beyond Academia Special Interest Group, which is sponsoring this webinar. And Anna, take it away.
All right, thank you, David. So I'm wanting to show my slides. And I'm getting the poll. Sorry, David. How do I get my slides to pop up? Show there. Now it became the. It suddenly worked. All right. Are people seeing my slides?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So welcome everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you for doing that poll. Those questions are really helpful to know how to frame what we're talking about today. So it sounds like a lot of people are in these, early stages of navigation. So that's perfect. That's wonderful. I like to contextualize all this by using the metaphor of journey. Career as journey. This is a metaphor that a lot of people use, but as metaphors, I think we can use this metaphor a little bit more deliberatively, a little bit more practically, and this is hopefully an exemplification of what we can mean when we say be a linguist for yourself, right? Linguist teaches, your training in linguistics has taught you how to be a good researcher. So now there's something that you're going to be researching that is really tremendously important to your life and to your expression of your talents and your gifts and your skills, and that's going to be the topic of career. So here we are. If you want to imagine yourself navigating, taking this journey, here you are out. You're on a path, and I like to think about the signposts that you might find as you're out there orienteering, navigating, and becoming more aware that you're looking for signposts can help you be better able to notice them when they come along. If you've heard me give my story of the hike, you'll know that this saguaro cactus was a signpost, but there are other kinds of signposts that we can be thinking about. We can be thinking about, little clues that people who have traveled before us have for us, and that's one of the things we might be paying attention for in this discussion today. You can think about the people that are traveling with you, or the people that you are visiting, the people that you meet along the way. These are your traveling companions. And now, by the end of this webinar, you will have 4, 5 more new traveling companions to help guide you along the way. And another type of signpost are what I like to call the walk signs. I use this acronym WALK for what a linguist knows. I call the work interrogatives your walk signs. So these are questions that you can start using to frame more deliberative discussion, more deliberative reflection, more careful, concise, curious questions when you sit down and talk to somebody. Like here in this image, it's meant to portray an informational interview. That guy may not be the friendliest looking informational interviewee, but imagine yourself talking to somebody very lovely and wonderful who's agreed to sit down with you to talk about their work. So here are some things that you might want to think about. Our panelists today are going to each tackle 2 of these work interrogatives as a way of sort of showing you how these help you think about work, think about the details of work, the day-to-day, the purpose, the broader meaning, the nitty-gritty. So this, you can find more about this on my blog, careerlinguist.com, how I came to think about these walk signs. WALK stands for what a linguist knows. Yeah, well, let's jump into it. These are the 3 folks who have agreed to share bits of their journey with you. Marco Crand, Avi Ilam, and Holly Richardson. These are folks that I interviewed over the course of writing Bringing Linguistics to Work. And so I knew that they would be very contemplative, very insightful, and intrepid, as I have been describing them in advertising this panel. Intrepid career linguists. So each one of them has been asked to focus on 2 of the work interrogatives. They will tell you as they go. And let's see how this helps you think about career in new ways. And I want you to be, as you're listening, typing in questions for us. Each one of them is going to speak for 5-10 minutes. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time for discussion so that you can ask your own interrogatives. So with that, thank you all for being here. And let's begin with Marco Crand.
All right, thanks. Let's try something here. Oops.
Mark, are you still with us? You've frozen. Frozen on an oops. You say, are you on mute perhaps, Mark? Because it says you're talking, but I don't hear you. And actually, maybe while we give Mark a chance to sort out that, would it be all right if we jumped to Holly or Avi? Are either one of you ready to jump in first? Maybe Avi. David, could you give Avi the presenter?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. As Anna said, I'm Avi Elam, and I guess brief background, I finished my PhD in linguistics in 2011 at Penn, and since then I've actually been working outside academia in various writing, communications, and marketing roles. Right now I manage social media for a social media as part of digital marketing at a vitamin company by the name of Healthy Directions in Bethesda, Maryland. I've worked for Rosetta Stone, for nonprofits, various other roles in, again, writing, communications, and digital marketing. And happy to talk about those things as well. But here specifically, Anna has asked me to discuss 2 interrogatives as she presented them, and specifically the where and the when. So I have a slideshow right here, pretty brief. I will present it. So the way I presented things here is kind of as a contrast between academia and non-academia, and also within the non-academic world, what kinds of things you might want to think about. So when we're talking about where, we're talking about where you work, and a clear contrast is between working on site versus from home or remotely. And usually when you're talking about that distinction in the context of what we're discussing, you can talk about academia versus non-academia. A lot of academic work is done from home or from random places, not from a specific office. Whereas when you're working outside academia, many times you do have to work on site. You have to work in an office together with other people around you. Sometimes there's an option to work remotely, not always, and sometimes it's maybe a few days a week. It depends on the workplace. I should say, though, that many of the careers that academics go into after, or PhD students or PhD graduates go into after finishing their program, a lot of these jobs are jobs that allow for remote work, jobs in writing and communication. So it's something worth thinking about. And when you think about this distinction, there are a few things you might want to think about when you're looking for jobs and what you're personally interested in. So as I wrote here, one question you might want to ask yourself is, how important to you and to your productivity is the presence of others and interacting with them? And for me personally, this question came up very it was a very kind of prominent question for me as I was dissertating, actually, because I discovered, and I think a lot of other grad students find this out, that I really needed to have other people around me in order to get things done. And so for me, both whether I was inside academia or now in my non-academic career, I really would prefer not to work from home. Having people around me helps me get things done. Having meetings with people, or just having them, having people around me doing things motivates me to do things as well. And the other thing that I've found very helpful in my, both, again, as I was a graduate student and in my non-academic career, is the structure that this kind of place gives me. And that relates to the second question I had here: how well do I work when structure isn't imposed from the outside? So in academia, as you all probably know, there isn't much structure. Okay, let's say you're an assistant professor, you've just got a tenure-track job or an adjunct position. Other than your teaching hours, 2, 4, 6 hours a week, all the rest of your time is not structured, and you can do whatever you want or not do. Do or not do what you're quote-unquote supposed to do. Outside academia, if you're working on site, usually that's not the case. 9 to 5 jobs are still the norm. It could be 8 to 6. It could be 10 to 7. Those things kind of vary, but there is some structure, both in terms of the hours you're doing, and we'll get to the when in a second, and in terms of the place, right? Because you have to be at the office at a certain time, and even if you're doing remote work outside academia, you may or may not have. I mean, you're going to have some structure. You're probably going to have online meetings. You may have less structure, or you will have less structure than you would if you worked in an office. And for me, again, personally, that structure is something I find helpful, and this obviously varies between people, because some people really want to be told they need to work, between 9 and 10 on this, 10 and 12 on something else, and so on, or at the very least have a kind of a very a more open structure that tells them that at least between 9 to 5 they need to be in a certain place, and that's where they need to work. What I find interesting is that in many ways, and when I was thinking about working in academia, is like working remotely. I think I might have kind of noted that earlier, because other than the hours that you teach, you really are free to work wherever you want to. But academia nonetheless dictates in many cases, and certainly in a field like linguistics, which is so small, it dictates where you live. And this is another issue related to the where question, the issue of where you work and where you live. And this is, again, coming back to me personally, when I finished my PhD and kind of realized that where I found a job, whether tenure track or an adjunct position, could, that would have to, that would force me to live in that location, given the lack of positions in academia, specifically in such a small field as linguistics. That kind of realization hit me, and I realized that I wasn't very comfortable living in certain places. I wanted to have the option of choosing where I wanted to live. And if you're outside academia, whether or not you're working remotely, you often have that choice. So if I'm working in communications, well, communications jobs are available basically everywhere, right? So I want to live in Los Angeles, so I can move to Los Angeles and find a job afterwards, and not have the job dictate beforehand where I live. And something I also realized as I was finishing up my PhD is that academia seems to kind of not put very much emphasis on how important where you live is. And I just wrote some obvious things here about how this influences cost of living, your options for leisure time, distance from family and friends, the weather, and so on. And these are things we often, I think, kind of ignore while we're grad students, but it's worth taking time to consider and think about how that influences your career decisions. And that's why it brings up the question, how important are these things to you, and how much are you willing to compromise when you're choosing academia versus non-academia? And if you choose to be outside academia, what if you have different job options, what are you going to do? So that's the where. And then the when, which I kind of already touched on, is the issue of structure versus flexibility. As I write here, work outside academia typically dictates how much time you can spend not working, meaning on vacation, taking time off. Whereas inside academia, you teach, and then the rest is pretty unstructured. You have the whole summer off, but even outside the summer, your hours are very unstructured. And whereas work outside academia sets boundaries both for when you work on each task and for how long. Because if I have a report due, let's say next Monday, I know how much time I have to devote to it and when I need to submit it. And outside academia, because the deadlines are so short, you're kind of these things are very they're determined in advance, and you don't have much flexibility. As I wrote here, these boundaries are usually rigid, and flouting them outside academia has repercussions beyond yourself. Because if I don't submit this report to my boss, her boss's boss might get up, might be unhappy with the result, and so on. So because of this often complex structure you have outside academia, many people are influenced by your actions and when you do them. So when you're considering this distinction of structure versus flexibility, and as it applies to, let's say, academia, which would be the more flexible part, versus non-academia, which would be the more structured side of this dichotomy, maybe, ask yourself, do you prefer setting your own schedule? And how important is that to you? Because that's something you'll be able to do much more freely outside inside academia, whereas if you have a non-academic job, you're more limited. And I touched on this a second ago, how comfortable are you working with short-term deadlines? Because this is very common outside academia. There's a lot of pressure to get things done quickly. You have very rigid, often very rigid deadlines for things, and they're short-term. And so you can't just, I remember submitting journal articles inside academia, and you could just delay things, as a reviewer, things might take months. Outside academia, this won't fly. If a report is due a certain date, it's going to have to be ready that day, for the most part, from my experience. And so that's it for my kind of discussion of where and when, and I'm happy to share this deck later. And on the last slide here, I have various resources. They're mostly about working remotely versus working in an office, and I personally recommend the last one there. It's from the New Yorker, a very funny column on working from home. So that's it from me for now for the presentation, and happy to take any questions later on.
Yay, Mark, we have you back.
All right.
We skipped over you. Are you ready to?
Well, we'll find out.
Are you back with us?
We're about to find out.
Thank
See
you.
my name?
We can now see. Oh, I think we can see your slides. We saw them for a second. Now we see your name.
It's my name. Okay, that's what you're supposed to see.
And Avi, while Mark is talking, why don't you go ahead and hide your camera?
All right, I should probably hide mine too, but I'll leave mine there. So I have been I've been probably, of the people on the panel here, I'm certainly the oldest. Haven't been thinking about looking for a job for a very long time, so I thought what I would do is just go through what happened to me as I was looking for things to do. First, a little bit about me. I graduated from the University of California in Santa Cruz with a BA in linguistics, then went on and got a PhD in linguistics from Berkeley. As I was writing my dissertation for a year or so after that, I taught at UC Santa Barbara. And then I got a postdoc at the Smithsonian Institution in the National Anthropological Archives, where I was doing some research on some California Indian languages. And that's what my graduate studies were mostly about, was American Indian languages, mostly on the West Coast, mostly in California, and mostly languages with 0 speakers at the time. But then my career kind of veered away from academia. I spent most of my time doing actually closed captioning, which, as you know, is subtitles on TV for people who are deaf and hard of hearing, although now they're kind of ubiquitous in bars and restaurants and airports and every place. And then in the midst of all that, I was lucky enough to kind of go off on yet another direction, and had the fortunate, I think, fortunate job of creating some non-English dialogue for some movies and TV shows, particularly Star Trek. But when I was a graduate student in Berkeley, and when I was teaching in Santa Barbara, and when I was at the Smithsonian, I never envisioned a particular career path that I would take. I assumed that after being at the Smithsonian for a year, and it was a definite one-year fellowship, that I'd return to teaching and research at a university someplace or other. And my stint at the Smithsonian was 1 year as advertised, but my return to a university never happened. The job market that year was tough, nothing unusual about that. I was having a hard time finding a job that matched my skills with my research and teaching interests. I kept looking, nevertheless, and then one day I went to a party, which is ultimately why I'm here today, because what happened at that party. But I'll come back to that. For this webinar, Navigating Careers, as you know, we're going through the different interrogatives. Each of us has 2. Mine are how and what. About a week after we determined who would be doing which question words, and totally unrelated to that or anything else, I went to see a play by the American playwright, by and about the American playwright August Wilson. And the title of this play, ironically enough, was How I Learned What I Learned. That was a pretty interesting bit of serendipity. Actually, the title is longer. It's How I Learned What I Learned, and how what I learned led me to places I've wanted to go. And it's actually even longer than that. The play was about Wilson's early life, before he had written any plays, and how he used his observations about the places he lived and the people he saw to form the foundation for the stories and characters of the plays he'd write later on. In other words, it was about his approach to playwriting, the how, and the experience and background that he brought to that, which is the what. So now back to that party. At this party, summer in DC, I happened to meet someone who was working for the department, which was then the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. It doesn't exist anymore, that department. Anyway, he worked in the division of that department that dealt with education of deaf people. And he found out that I was a linguist, which he found out, I guess, because we did the normal DC, what do you do? What do you do thing. He kind of lit up when he heard I was a linguist. And he told me there was a new technology being developed that was to help deaf people watch television. And he described closed captioning, which is a whole new word to me at the time. And he said that a linguist would be a perfect person to work on that project. So my interest was piqued because I was a linguist, and specifically I was a soon-to-be unemployed linguist. So I was wondering how I could fit in. The need for a linguist had to do with how spoken dialogue was to be represented in written form. And for reasons that we don't have to get into now at all. The thinking at the time was the verbatim transcript was the wrong way to go, and it was better to have simpler sentences. So what did I know about this? I knew the differences between spoken and written language. I knew about analyzing grammatical structures into constituent components, so that kind of fit in with what he was talking about. In addition, when I was in high school and in college, I worked in radio. That's actually a picture of the place I used to work. And I never had seen a connection between this and linguistics before that conversation with him. But then I realized how the background actually could apply. Attention to timing, for example, which is important to TV. So this new closed captioning endeavor, this brand new thing, seemed to be kind of a merger between language and broadcasting, and that sounded like me. So I applied for the job, and they hired me. And I was right. It turned out that it was a merger of language and broadcasting. My background in linguistics in particular was mostly useful at the beginnings, in the early years of all this stuff, when we were establishing standards and procedures. We had a lot of discussions about things like weather, how to represent regional dialogue, dialects, and intonation, and pause words like and and all that sort of thing. Over time, the procedures and technology changed, and probably the most important innovation was the ability to caption a live program like news or sports, as opposed to a pre-recorded show like a movie or sitcom where we could get the program ahead of time. And I was involved in all of that. And when we were ready to go on the air with it, I was in charge of the very first live caption broadcast, which was the Academy Awards in 1982. This required me to be in Los Angeles for a week prior to the broadcast. And when I was there, I arranged to get together with an old friend. And we met for lunch where she worked. And where she worked happened to be Paramount Pictures. And the project she was working on at the time was the second Star Trek movie, Wrath of Khan. One of her co-workers joined us for lunch, and my friend must have told her ahead of time that the person they were about to have lunch with, meaning me, was a linguist, because she told me about a plan that they had for this movie. They were going to hire a linguist from UCLA to come over and watch a scene that had been filmed with the actors speaking English, but they wanted to turn it into Vulcan, so this linguist was going to look at the scene, look at the lips, and basically make up gobbledygook that would look the same but sound different, and then they would have the actors dub it in. And as she's telling me this, I thought that was kind of interesting and a smart way to do it. And I was thinking exactly about, sort of how I would go about doing it. So, for example, I knew that bilabials look like bilabials and rounded vowels look like rounded vowels, so mo looks more or less like boo and things like that. But then she said there was some kind of a problem with this UCLA connection. I have no idea what it was. It's 35 years ago. It's ancient history. And they needed all of this stuff to be taken care of that particular week, which is exactly how long I was in town. And I'd just been thinking about what I would do, what I knew, and how I would go about doing it, even though there was no reason for me to think that in particular. But now there was. And I said, I can do that. Then a bunch of stuff happened, and the next day I found myself on a soundstage coaching Kirstie Alley to match nonsense syllables to her already recorded, already filmed English lip movements to make it look like she was speaking Vulcan. I had never taught anyone a foreign language before, much less a made-up gobbledygook language, but I had taught. So I was able to draw on that in coaching the actors. I taught Mr. Spock how to speak Vulcan a little later. If you're trying to match the lip movements to the subtitle here, that's because they changed the subtitle. The original English was "He's very human." The Oscars, by the way, went fine. Anyway, about a year and a half later, I got a call from the producer of Star Trek II, who was now producing Star Trek III, and he said that the villains were going to be the Klingons. And on the basis of those 4 lines of Vulcan gibberish, I somehow had become their language guy. And he asked me if I wanted to do Klingon. Now, this was going to be a very different task because this was conlanging. This was language creation, language construction, not just lip syncing. And I'd never done that before. But I knew, again, what I could bring to it. I knew about non-English phonological and grammatical systems, so I could draw from that and monkey with it, change it around. And I'd written a dissertation based on a language that I'd never heard, looking at random notes. So if I could do that, I could make up a language that no one had ever heard based on random lines of dialogue. So I figured, yeah, I can do this. And so now I'm doing Klingon for the movies. This led to some other projects, other languages for other movies. One of my favorite one, non-Star Trek, is probably Atlantean for a Disney film called Atlantis, The Lost Empire. And the reason it's my favorite is not because the language is particularly nifty. It's because the hero of the film is a linguist named Milo who knew how to take advantage of what he had learned, the what, and how to do it. And he saved the day. I'm sorry, this is a fuzzy picture, so you can't see the writing system he's pointing at. That's what Disney thinks a linguist looks like. So now, years later, I'm retired. I no longer do closed captioning, although I'm still connected to Klingon. I don't think that's going to go away anytime. And as I look back over all this, of course, I didn't always know what was going to turn out. What I knew, what I'd studied was, or what I'd experienced. I didn't know what was going to be important and what wasn't. But these things tend to add up or build up. And if you sort of think about what you know, and if you think about how to make use of that, then you'll be prepared, if an opportunity comes along to do something that you've always wanted to do, or like in my case, to do something that you never thought about at all in the first place. So that's the history of me and the what and the how.
That was phenomenal. Thank you, Mark. I love it how the work interrogative found the linguist. I think it was perfect to have you do the what and how, August Wilson notwithstanding. And now, last but certainly not least, Holly Richardson is going to tell us about her work interrogatives. Take it away, Holly. Holly, you're muted. Take yourself off mute.
That helps when you start talking and know that you're on mute. So thank you, Anna, for correcting me. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today on what's a really fun webinar and getting to think about how to marry your linguistics in your career with some other helpful ways to frame what you're thinking about and what you're doing. So I've been asked today to speak about why and who. And I want to back up and give a little bit of context about who I am. I have spent my career about the past 10 years working in the nonprofit sector. I graduated from Georgetown with a master's in language and communication in 2011 and participated in a program there that was very much centered around this question of how do you marry linguistics into career opportunities that are not academic or not traditional linguist stereotypic roles. So my orientation has always been towards helping people and wanting to be service oriented, and so the nonprofit sector has always felt like home for me. And my particular niche within it is working with nonprofit fundraising. I've worked for a number of small grassroots organizations, some mid-sized endeavors, and then some brand names that you may have heard of, like NPR. And the work that I have done throughout my career until recently has been frontline fundraising, meaning that I've been directly responsible for raising an organization's budget. So that is your, let's send out those direct mail appeals, let's call donors and arrange the lunches, I write the grant proposals, I arrange the special event, I call the corporation and ask them to sponsor the program or whatever it may be, and being very much responsible for raising the dollars from the ground up year over year. Most recently, however, and where I want to situate my discussion of why and who, is I made an important career change in that I have since, with the recent birth of my second child, decided to step back from frontline fundraising, and I joined a small consulting firm called Thread Strategies that works predominantly with small and mid-sized nonprofits, so in the $1 to $5 million budget range. And we help them assess their fundraising operations and strategy and see what they could be doing better and what they could be doing better, and they don't even know that they could be doing that better. So a lot of my work now is more analytical and discovery based and pattern recognition, which very much taps into my training as a linguist, where I get a whole bunch of documentation from these various nonprofits that serve as our clients, and I shuffle through old grant proposals, mail appeals, emails that they send. I look at their database and see the patterns of how are they operating right now in their fundraising operations, and how do we change those things to get them to a more efficient and more productive place in terms of raising dollars. So to think about this job change that I made from frontline fundraiser to consultant in terms of why and who, the why, I really thought about it in terms of there's two components to that, to this question. And the number one thing is, why do you want to do the specific duties of a given job? Are you trying to create some sort of resume value for yourself? Are you looking to have skill development? Or are you looking for a demonstration of expertise? And so for me to move from consulting, or excuse me, from frontline fundraising to consulting was very much around the specific duties of the job. I wanted to get away from frontline fundraising. I'd had a good long run doing that type of work and was tired and a little burnt out and was feeling the itch to get to do something else. So I wanted my day-to-day job and the personal value that I created for myself and the duties of my day-to-day job, I needed to like that better than frontline fundraising. So getting to step back into this consultant's role is one step removed. It's more higher level, and as I mentioned, the work is more analytical and discovery based, and not just are the I's dotted and T's crossed of this direct mail appeal that's going out this week, or has that donor been sent flowers for whatever reason it may be. And so I like what I do on a day-to-day basis better. I think where a lot of people get hung up in their job searches or thinking about what it is that they want to do is we get trapped by the title, first and foremost, of a position, and get really caught up in being a social media manager or a senior consultant or senior linguist or whatever the title of the job may be, and really need to give deeper examination to what are you actually going to be doing for 8 hours a day, multiple days a week. Because anything you do for that amount of time is going to get boring and bad at some point. And so you really want to make sure, as you're evaluating job descriptions and you're looking over the specific duties of a job, is that will you like doing that work for extended periods of time? And that then connects into, why do you want to work for that specific organization? Because there are certainly many times in life where something seems really great and shiny and you really love the work that that organization may do, but the specific opportunity in front of you at that place is going to be really boring, or is going to be a bad fit, or it's just not going to work for you in some other way. And part of my transition to Thread was the organization that I most recently worked with. There were some culture things that started to emerge that I was not a huge fan of, and that while I really liked and bought into their overall mission, the day-to-day work that I was doing for them wasn't worth my respect for the mission. So that what I was actually doing every day going into that office, the passion that I felt about the work that they were doing wasn't enough to sustain my getting itchy with my day-to-day. I think when you also think about why do you want to work for that specific organization, it really taps into how does it fit into the rest of your life. For me, as a mom with 2 young kids, I have a 2-year-old and a 4-month-old, I am really in the market for a position that could afford me greater work-life balance and flexibility. So with consulting, I now work from home, and I determine my hours and how much I work a week and when I get the work done, which works much, much better for my life right now because my kids get sick all the time. There's daycare things to attend to. You know, when they get home, they are go, 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 and I don't have time to be flexible. I need my time with them in the evenings to be structured. And so I need the rest of my day to afford me the flexibility to plan for that structure that I need later on in the evening. So working with the consulting firm that I do now, it's a small shop, it's really intimate, and they very much understand that balance of, hey, you get to decide when you do the work, and when you do it is when you do it. So that really works for the why for me for right now. I think the other component of why do you want to work for a specific organization ties really neatly into our question of who. And can be thought of in 3 different parts of who would your boss be, who would your coworkers be, and what culture do these people create together. Part of the reason that I was attracted to moving over to Thread Strategies, where I now work, is I really respect the woman who's my now boss. I know her from a couple of different professional avenues and through various colleagues, and I like her style. I like her forthrightness. I think she runs a tight ship. There's a very oft quoted maxim in the job world that people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses. And I had certainly had that be proven true at various points in my career. And I feel like right now, the woman that I work for, that maxim is not going to be true if I ever end up leaving, when I ever end up leaving this consulting firm. Because I really admire and think I admire my boss and think she's running a tight ship that I want to work for. She's running the type of organization I want to work for. I think another important thing is to think about who would your coworkers be. Are you going to be the youngest person on staff by years and years and years? Are you going to be the oldest person on staff by years and years and years? I've had that situation as well. And to think about, are you going to relate and enjoy working with the people that you work with? And altogether, what type of culture does that create? For me at Thread Strategies, one of the unique things about this firm is that all the other consultants are also moms with young families. So this is a place that has very intentionally been built up around this notion that there are professional, smart, accomplished women who want to keep working and contributing in our communities, but we also want time to be good moms and to spend time with our kids and to make that life balance work, and there should be a way to do it. So the culture of where I am now is very much aligned with where I am personally in my life, and I think that's really important to try and suss out as you're job hunting or evaluating opportunities, is to think about, is this going to be a place that is going to make me work extra hours and is going to be really nose to the grindstone, and I may learn a lot for that, but I'm not going to get to see my family, or my leisure opportunities may be limited. And is that okay for me at this point in life? Because sometimes it is, but other times it isn't. And to wrap up, I want to offer some practical tips that I think have worn me well throughout my various job searches and job changes. And number one, relating back to our question of why. Why do you want to do the specific duties of a job, and why do you want to work for that organization? Those are 2 questions that should be very concretely answered in your cover letter. So your cover letter, when you're writing to prospective job positions, needs to answer not only why are you interested in the job, but why do you want to do the specific things listed on that job description? Why are you good at grant writing? What value will you create for the organization if you are writing those grants for them? Why do you want to overhaul their database? Is it because you've got a lot of expertise doing that, or you want to take on that challenge? So you need to be able to communicate and think through clearly to your employer, pardon me, why it is that you're interested in a specific job isn't just about the job as sort of a big concept unto itself, but about the particular duties that you're going to be doing on the day-to-day. And then you also need to answer the question of why that specific organization. And it's not just, I love you and I think you're the best. It should be more, you should take it to the next level and try and suss out a more thoughtful and deliberative response to why them, why now, what value do you create for them? And I've heard often when I've applied for positions, gotten a position and started, that I've then been complimented on cover letters of saying, answering those two questions is really important. Because the point of a cover letter isn't to showcase why you're the best candidate around, it's to showcase why you're the best candidate for the job at that place. All of those things have to constellate together and be explicit within your cover letter. Sussing out who when you're job searching is a little bit harder, because anytime you interview, if you ask a question such as, what's the culture like here? You're going to get a rosy response. You know, everybody's going to give you the most polished version that they can of that, because, you know, they're not trying to shoot themselves in the foot. They're trying to make a hire, and they either want you in the position or they want to present themselves in the best light. So if you can, you want to try and ask for opportunities to meet other staff members. When you walk around the office space, is everybody just head down at their computers and working? Or, you know, are they out and about and talking together? Like, what a little bit of ethnographic methodology can you bring to actually being in your interview setting and looking around and seeing, what are the people doing right now? And can I envision myself doing those same types of things with this group of people that I see together? And then the last practical tip that I would want to add before handing it back over would be to say, don't shirk the opportunity to ask questions throughout the interview process. Really come prepared with thoughtful questions about the particular job and the organization and who you might be working with, and display your interest and maximize that opportunity to try and get some of these answers out and get beneath the polish and the shine of what they might say about themselves. Every organization that I've hired for, and I now do a lot of hiring as a consultant, if I have candidates who just say, nope, I don't have any questions, I'm all good, thank you, that's lazy to me, and I'm not impressed. So you should have questions. I want to see people probing further and trying to understand if their fit is going to be the best fit too for that organization. And so with that, I think I will hand it back over to our presenter, David, and we will get some questions and answers going.
Okay, thank you everybody for speaking, and we do have some questions. Again, if you haven't asked a question yet but you would like to, please write it into the question widget and we'll get to it. So here's the first one. Finished my linguistics MA recently. College linguistics program long ago at a liberal arts college. Learned the basics of Mandarin well then, and I'm currently a translator and tutor. Accent has always been spot on. I'm thinking about three aspects to career. One, teaching both language and Chinese, or linguistics and Chinese. Two, tutoring. And three, translation. So I think that's more of a reaction question.
I like that there's multiple paths.
Yeah. Any comments from any of you?
I could share that I do have, while I was job searching a few times, I have taught Hebrew. I've also worked in translation from Hebrew and Arabic. I did this, actually I taught while I was a grad student too. So yeah, those jobs are out there. I would say the only thing, you know, just to think about when you're looking for those jobs, they're often kind of freelance jobs. It's harder to find kind of a full-time position. So it might be a better fit for people who are looking for kind of less structure, more flexibility, set their own schedules, things like that.
Okay. There's another question here. And there's actually two questions, but they're from the same person, so I'll read them together. Is there a place in the profession for resumptive doctoral students? And the second question, is there a place in linguistics for late middle-aged and older students?
Yes. What was the first? I think I missed a word in the first question. Resumptive?
Resumptive. I assume that means somebody who was in a doctoral program long ago and is now coming back.
Yeah. So I guess I'll jump in to say that there's so many people having this conversation right now. I'm a part of a lot of communities. Versatile PhD is a great resource. There's a lot of people asking precisely these kinds of questions. There are, for linguists, resources like Ling Outside that listserv, and well, this community, Linguistics Beyond Academia, that are comprised of people at all stages of career and all stages of starting and stopping and changing careers. I hope that was one thing that came across, was the dynamism. Each of these panelists has changed and questioned, and I think it's because of the questions, because these guys do continue to really interrogate work, to be constantly kind of recalibrating, reassessing. Is this a good fit? What would make this a better fit? So I guess what I hear in that question is that you are asking yourself the right kinds of questions, and you're trying to figure out what's best for you. I want to say you're not alone. There are communities, and keep asking.
And I would add one thing: if it's returning to school, returning to graduate work or something like that, there was something that you did in between, from the time between the time you stopped the first time around and the time you're starting again, and that's probably valuable to whatever it is you're going to end up doing. And when you get around to looking for a job and all that, make sure to point that out. It's not a whole. It matters a lot what happened in between, because everything falls together somehow.
Great, thank you. Then we have a question specifically for Holly. It says, Holly is talking about going from fundraising to consulting. However, I'd like to know how she made the jump from linguistics to fundraising and how she explained that in her first interviews. Also, how does her linguistics background help in consulting? What linguistic skills are valuable in her career right now?
Yeah, great questions all around. So I actually got to fundraising before I got to linguistics, kind of. So I was a French and linguistic anthropology major in undergrad and didn't really have a sense of where I was going to go with that or what that meant. I very much went to college and was one of those people that just took what I loved and learned what I loved in college without really thinking, what do I do professionally with that knowledge afterwards? And so I came out of college, traveled and lived in Thailand for a year, and then I came back to Philadelphia, where I'm originally from, and went, aha, I need a job, and searched around and just got an entry-level position in fundraising, because I will say the one thing about nonprofit fundraising, it's an incredibly productive area for jobs. Everybody is always needing fundraising, particularly nowadays, with changes in potential changes coming down the pipe from government funding to the social services sector. So I started off in fundraising and very much thought about it as, here's just my entry-level job. Here's how I get a foot into the workplace, but this is not what I'm going to do over the long term. I haven't specifically chosen this. It really was a job and I needed to work. So I did that entry-level position for about a year and a half, and then went back to graduate school for linguistics, having thought about what did I want to go to school for, and still really oriented towards what did I like learning and what got me excited, and then I would figure out how that translated into a career. But I also very much went to graduate school with the intention of using that as a pivot point away from fundraising, that I thought I would go more into the program side of nonprofits. And I was specifically interested in early childhood literacy, and tried a position on the program side of that when I first came out of graduate school, and it was a terrible fit. Everybody else that I worked with was a former teacher and had very strong opinions about what you do in a classroom, and I had very strong opinions about good nonprofit management and knowing how language skills build and learn. So I was very much at odds with the folks that I worked with, and it was really hard. I really felt like an outsider to that question of who you work with. I did not, even though everybody was my peer in terms of age and the amount of experience that they've had, we came from such different places that we were not peers, and it was not a great culture. So I got back to the fundraising side sort of as a runaway from what was really not working out with program work, but thought, I know fundraising. I had continued grant writing on the side during graduate school as a part-time job. And then it all sort of came together that with my linguistics training, particularly in sociolinguistics, I use all of those skills every day, particularly for my writing skills as a grant writer and writing direct mail correspondence to donors. I'm being very deliberative and thoughtful about what language I'm putting in when and why, being audience oriented and how I write. I'm bringing to bear all of my linguistic skills about pragmatics, about discourse analysis, about conversation analysis, and putting those on the page to tell a story. I've also found that one of the things that I use a ton in my line of work is face orientation towards negative or positive face, both in terms of donor relations and helping to understand, all right, is this donor somebody who wants to be respected for their independence and that we have to treat and doesn't want to be brought so intimately in, or is this somebody who wants to be my best friend and really wants to feel the warm and fuzzies and get to the warm and fuzzy parts of things. And then it's also been really, really helpful for managing supervisor relationships, that particularly in the nonprofit sector, you tend to work with folks of very good intention and a lot of heart, but not a ton of great management skill. And understanding how to read warning signs for them of when they're getting spun up, or how to balance face back and forth has been really, really useful. So those would be two big things I would name of how my linguistics training I definitely use every day. Oh, the one other thing I would name really quick is pattern recognition. I get a ton of data from clients of various documents, and even sitting in meetings with them and being able to listen and look for the patterns of what are recurring themes to them in their presentations. That I learned how to do through linguistics.
Okay, thanks. Just a note, we're coming up on an hour, but if the panelists can stay a few more minutes, I think any audience members that would like to stay are certainly welcome, and we'll go through some more questions. So the next one is, I work with undergraduate linguistics majors at a large public Midwestern school. Many are curious about career opportunities available at the bachelor's level and wonder if they should go to grad school right away or wait and go later after working a while. What are your thoughts on this? And the questioner says anyone can answer.
I'll jump in as, so I chose to work in between undergrad and graduate school, and I really valued that experience. I think it made me more specific and purposeful about why I was going to graduate school and what I was hoping to get out of it. Obviously, I think the baseline answer is it's got to be the right answer for the person. You know, there's no best, pardon me, one size fits all answer to that. But I would say, in my program at least, the majority of folks had worked in between, and everybody came back to graduate school with a much sharper focus as to why they were there and what they wanted to get out of it. Avi or Mark, would you?
Yeah, I would just say I agree that it's better to have that work experience in between for another reason, which is especially if you're going into a PhD program where the post-graduation prospects are not always that great. Having that work experience in between will certainly help you if you decide not to go into academia. So just being very practical.
And I would third, I guess, all of that.
And if I can fourth it, I guess what I would say too is that for the purposes of navigating, Mark said it just before in his answer to the other question too, but what you would choose to do is telling. You know, there's something to pay attention to. You know, as students are, I would hope that this practice might be one way to sort of give them a tool for asking these kinds of questions. What are you drawn to? And there's something, the reason I call these road signs, you know, is that they provide some information. There's a reason why you would be drawn to, you know, when somebody brings this question of should I do graduate school, should I do work? My question would be, what work are you drawn to, and then why? And would a graduate degree, how would that play into that path? You know, start to think what comes next. If, you know, if that, then what? And these questions can be a really helpful tool for talking that through.
I also think one last thought, I also think getting to work a little bit before graduate school is also informative for what program, pardon me, you should go back to school for. Because in the nonprofit sector, anybody else who has a master's degree has a master's of public policy or public administration. And I stand out for having a linguistics degree but can really easily make the case about why it's useful and makes me better at my job. But getting to work a little bit gives you a little bit of sense of sort of what's a traditional graduate school approach that somebody would go for, or if they want to go for something that has a little bit more passion and just intuitive interest to it, that you still can make that case, but you learn the landscape better of if you choose a certain program, how is that going to play in your landscape?
Great. Now we have a question that says, Mark, your how really spoke to me. Or really spoke to the way I've always thought my own career will unfold, that I still don't know the name of the position I will end up in, or that it even exists. Can you and the other panelists come up with some good keywords relating to linguistics that might make a new job I've never heard of pop up?
I love that question.
I would go along with what Holly said earlier about pattern recognition, if you want to call it that. Analysis, and because I've thought about this, over the years when I'm when I put a period in a sentence or not in a caption, is just thinking about, what is going on here? What am I seeing? How do things fit together? And that's linguistics. So knowing how to look at sort of raw data, whatever that means, in real life, and imposing structure on it so that you can talk about it and make sense about it. And the kind of linguistic analysis people doing, if you're doing grammatical analysis, what is this suffix really supposed to be doing here? Oh, I've got a theory. Look, I'm right. Oops, I'm wrong. And understanding that you're wrong so you can make the corrections. That comes from linguistics as well.
One thing I've been looking into lately is user experience research, and there's so much there that I find is directly contained in my skill set from being trained as a linguist. And these were things I would not have known about. Design, thinking, the keywords that I would never have known, return jobs that linguists are good at.
I think data is the big one I think of. Pretty much every job has data in it somehow now. And being able to talk to your fluency with handling different types and quantities of data is a very good entry point.
Synthesizing, analyzing, presenting.
Yeah, I was just going to say data science is like the buzzword in corporate America nowadays. So although a lot of those positions do require some kind of programming or very advanced quantitative skills or that kind of stuff, but even maybe if you don't have those skills, even in fields like marketing where I work, you definitely have to have pretty good data skills, just but not at that level. So if you know how to use Excel, handle basic numbers, those things are, all those kinds of industries and jobs definitely look for that that experience and that knowledge.
Great. We have time for a couple more?
Yep.
Sure.
Okay. In your fields, if most of your colleagues and competitors are non-linguists, what are your strengths and weaknesses in relation to them?
I want to jump in and answer, ironically, with the ability to listen. I think that being a linguist gives a strategic advantage in our patience for ambiguity, and I can see it arise in moments of confusion, which, as it happens, arise often in the workplace, just like in life generally. As a linguist, I can see that I am trained to expect misunderstanding, and I will hold interactions. I will hold space for navigating understanding in a way instinctively because of my training, and I think that makes me, it expresses itself. I get complimented on client management skills, or they'll call it new business development, or just follow through. But I would say that that's absolutely because of my linguistics training, just because I listen for misunderstanding and possible misunderstanding.
I would say being very detail-oriented. As a linguist, you have to pay attention to the most minute and maybe what seem like the most insignificant facts. And any job in marketing or communications, you have to be very detail-oriented. Notice, like if you're editing a document, notice typos, that kind of stuff. So that's definitely you usually come in with that if you're going into linguistics, and having that with you will help you in your job search later on.
And the two things that I do, obviously the conlanging thing is linguistics, and then my colleagues who are doing that are also linguists, and the people who have to say the stuff are actors, in my case. And actors, some of them are trained in phonetics and so forth, and some are not. So you have a different thing. So teaching them to do that is relevant. But in the captioning part, I work mostly with non-linguists, meaning people who didn't have a degree in linguistics, not people who didn't know about language. And I became the go-to person for, some really good language questions, and also some very trivial ones, like do I put a comma here and stuff like that. And the way that linguistics was useful is the answer to do I put a comma here was given with some kind of was able to give an explanation other than the rule in Strunk and White says do it. That's not a good reason. The reason you want to do it or not do it is because blah, blah, blah. And we could talk about it in that way.
I think most of the people that I work with tend to understand linguistics as, oh, so it's like communications. They just bucket it into like, you do communications, and it's, there's not a very strong understanding of what exactly else that brings to the table. And then it's up to me to decide sort of what are the moments and venues where it makes sense to plant my flag a little bit more firmly and say, no, my training is different, and this is why we want to think about these things this way. And other moments where you're just like, yep, it's communications. That's just, sure, let's just go with that. So yeah, so I think a lot of people, because everybody speaks, I think a lot of, I run into often that a lot of people think that they have the same level of expertise or framing or perception that I do just because they're an English speaker and because they talk, and so that like their opinion is as valid about a particular language issue as mine coming as a linguist, and that can be frustrating at times where you want to say, just because we all walk doesn't mean that I'm a amazing marathon runner, and that we should all give me a gold medal for running. Like it's so that sometimes can just get itchy where folks can sort of discredit your background training because they think, oh, language, I do that too.
Okay, so there's one question here I'm going to answer myself because we actually have an entire other webinar that relates to it. So the question is, do you have advice or experience on self-employed / freelance linguists? In what areas can they be involved? How do they start? So I'm sending a link now. It is to a webinar that we did a while ago on careers outside the classroom. And that's a page on our website, and then there's the link there to actually view the webinar. So there's one more question if you guys have time.
Yep.
Just got a certificate in computational linguistics. I'm going ahead with a master's program. Curious about linguistic tool knowledge versus code knowledge in job searches. By the way, I am one of those late stage people. I returned to school after 35 years.
Does anyone have expertise to offer here?
I guess I need help understanding a little bit more. David, would you mind just repeating what the question is?
I'm sorry, I just removed it. I can't find it.
I guess a blog that I...
Linguistic knowledge versus code knowledge, and I think it makes it...
Coding?
Oh, wait. For instance, WEKA, LIWC as tools versus Python, etc. So the questioner is already out of my depth. But,
I recognize enough words to say that Chris Phipps is someone whose blog that person might want to check out. Lousy Linguist is his blog. He is an avid sharer of resources for people who are doing, natural language processing and coding, and would be a good source of information. I have recently moved to the Bay Area, and I'm starting to learn my coding stuff, but I'm just a beginner.
Okay, so I think that's a bit. I'll just take. Anna, did you have anything to end up with, or?
I guess I just wanted to say thank you to all the panelists for taking their questions and doing such a beautiful job at really exploring and exemplifying that exploration. I think we can see, I posed at the beginning of the webinar potential context for doing this, that people could bring these questions to their community in the context of informational interviews. But I think that you heard there's so much more to this practice too. It's a tool for thinking, and it's a tool for evaluating, and for those of you who are advising students, it can be a tool for coaching and advising and counseling as well. So I hope that these questions, Holly talked about asking questions in the context of a job interview. I hope that these could be some of them. Questions are good. Ask them. Keep asking.
Okay, thank you, Anna, and thanks again, everybody, for taking the time to join us. And many thanks to our panelists for a really fun and informative hour. And as you've seen on the slideshow here, as a thank you for joining us, we're offering a 20% discount on LSA regular and student memberships. You can go to www.linguisticsociety.org/join to sign up and use the coupon code NAVIGATING at checkout to obtain the discount. As I mentioned earlier, a recording of this webinar will be posted on the LSA website probably next week, and we'll send you a notification when it's available. And finally, we'd like to get a little feedback about how we did with this webinar. I'm sending around a link right now, and if you wouldn't mind taking a few moments to answer it as just about 3 questions, that would be great. So many thanks again, everybody. Special thank you to our panelists, and goodbye and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, David.
Thanks.
Hi, everybody.
Bye.